Normally we would do introduction sessions.
Yeah. Should we do an introduction round? Like everybody says something about themselves?
I think so, yeah.
I can kick it off. I can
Yeah,
start.
please.
Sure. So yeah, everybody, hello. My name is Anya Blay, and I'm a co-founder of Future Law Institute. We started this Future Law Virtual Summit because we believe that there is not enough interdisciplinary dialogues, and we really wanted to provide everybody an opportunity to kind of get to know these topics a bit better. I'm otherwise a so-called space lawyer, although I don't really practice the space laws. It's just one of my biggest interests. And together with Gupta law, I hope that there's going to be soon established a moon registry, perhaps on blockchain one day. Who knows? So yeah,
Mm.
that's a bit about me.
A what registry?
A land registry.
Like
Mm.
a like for land in space?
Yeah, people want to distribute the land in space, especially now that you have the Artemis Accords.
Now that you have the what?
Artemis Accords, it's like a new set of laws that allows the US to kind of demand of everybody that is going to be launching in space to sign these accords with them. And then, they're kind of enabled to appropriate the land or at least set their own set of rules on how we might be distributing the land once we um, land on it. So how the land is being protected and who has the rights over them and who has the rights over whatever minerals we mine and stuff like that.
This
A
is for
bit
like
off topic.
asteroids as well as like the moon.
Yeah, all the celestial bodies. But Vlad, we're going to be talking about that on different panels with regard to space. We could be addressing that here as well because it has a lot to do with the governance systems as well, and the power dynamics. So whatever politics or whatever topics around the politics we're going to be mentioning, it might as well be very useful to kind of put that into the space domain as well.
So I'm
What
John.
about next time?
I'm John Haskell. I'm at the University of Manchester Law School and junior faculty member of the Institute for Global Law and Policy. And at Manchester, I co-direct the School of Social Sciences Law Money Tech program, as well as the like a consortium between the university departments called the Law and Technology Initiative. So just very grateful for Anya and Vlad and Anuj and everyone, and Andrea. It's very nice to be in this space together today. I hand it over to Andrea.
Cool. Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Andrea Leiter. I am in academia as well. I work at the University of Amsterdam in the Department for Public International Law, which is also my background. Yeah, I've been in touch with many of these people in different ways now. I'm very happy that we are having this workshop together. It's cool.
Yeah.
And interesting to see. I'm really from different contexts. So I am also fond of trying to take advantage of this time here together to discuss a couple of things and ideas. Yeah, crypto law is maybe the thing that brings us here together and ideas about it. So let's see where we get.
Thank you.
Who do you choose? Throw the hot potato.
Sorry, of course I have to throw the hot potato. Yeah, I'm throwing it to Morshed because he was just as excited as me.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am finished. My name is Morshed. I am finishing my PhD at the Company Law Department of Leiden Law School. So I'm also in the Netherlands. And originally, I studied in the UK. I was at the University of Warwick. I was called to the bar there. And then I worked as a lawyer in Bangladesh, worked as a labor lawyer, corporate lawyer, did some investment law work as well. And then, came to the Netherlands for my master's and then entered into academia where I do research on cooperatives in the platform economy. And so I use different legal and socio-legal methods to study this. And that's sort of how a couple of years ago I entered into this whole crypto law space and started looking at the intersection of all of these things. And I think, I guess because of that, I have a slightly different perspective, but also I think there's a lot of very interesting complementarities here. I'm really looking forward to it too. I'll throw it to Anuj.
Thank you, everybody. Hi, everybody. Very nice to be here, and very grateful to be in the company of such, wonderful and esteemed colleagues of mine. And welcome to those who are attending the workshop. So, my name is Anuj. I am a researcher in governance and crypto, mostly focused on Ethereum. I have mostly a background in tech and in theology. So I usually look at these kinds of, and of course, other things as it comes along to learn about these things and think around these things. So I'm excited to be here and learn from everybody. I hand it over to Vlad.
Hey everyone. So I'm Vlad Zamfir. Kind of my background's in math and eventually computer science after I got into crypto. And then I got interested in blockchain governance, basically because of concerns about how the blockchain space was going. And that kind of naturally got me interested in crypto law, basically because it ends up being basically a really, really important governance issue, because in governance, whenever there's any kind of contention, people have conflict, and then law becomes a kind of very, very much an issue, or very operative. And so I kind of became interested in law and crypto law specifically, maybe almost 2 years ago also. But after kind of being interested in blockchain governance for a good number of years.
All right. So for all those people who might be joining us later, and for the future reference, we don't really expect people to have high level of legal expertise here. No computer science knowledge is pre-required. However, we won't really be diving deeply into the basics of blockchain. So a bit of a familiarity with the blockchain and blockchain governance is expected. The lab is going to be facilitated by all these wonderful people. So while we are going to be going into these discussions and possibly even the breakout rooms, we're going to be creating some of the notes on the side. We also have a shared Notion, which is right now for internal purposes, but we might be at one point opening it up. There's going to be a couple of digital tools that we might be using in the future, like Miro or Mentimeter, just to see what people are thinking and to kind of crowdsource all these ideas together and then show the results. So if anybody has any questions, there's also a chat. People can at any point give their questions or shoot their questions directly to the facilitators. There's also going to be Facebook room or Facebook group. People are very welcome to join there as well and send some of the questions. What's the Mentimeter? Okay, the Mentimeter is basically a web platform where we crowdsource all our questions or words. We collect, for example, let's say a question would be, what is one word that comes to your mind when we say blockchain governance? Hello, Earthman. And then everybody types in the word. And if there is some words that are repeating, then the Mentimeter is going to be showing us, for example, which word has been used the most, or it's going to provide us with some analytics.
Word cloud.
Type of, yeah. We're going to be, yeah, let's try it out at one point. Hey, Earthman, we just had a round of presentations. Do you want to give us an introduction just before we kick in?
An introduction to what? To me?
To yourself, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I am Earthman. I have, in this context, participating in GCR, Global Challenges Retreat from 2017 with Anya, where I met Anya for the first time, and Margaret, and the rest of the bunch, many of them that have made this possible. And right now I'm with my son, as you can hear. I am, I could call myself a cell philosopher. I am one that have lived in various unique ways around some other human beings, where we have developed language and ways of thinking and ways of interacting and living with each other that are relevant in many ways, also in these problems, tackling these problems that are put forth here in this meeting. And then I will have to jump off a little later because I'm on Bornholm Island and so on, but that's pretty much about it. I'm looking so much forward for all this. Privileged being here.
Thank you so much. Great to have you also. All right, so Vlad, do you want to introduce a couple of topics? We have about 10 topics to be presented over the span of 5 days. I do believe that we're going to be able to, jump into at least 2 of them per day. Let's see how far we get. But Vlad, do you want to introduce the topics, or should I run?
Sure. I mean, I would love to, yeah. Basically, our thought was to start today with some relatively introductory topics in blockchain governance and crypto law. They're somewhat related, although not super duper directly related topics. Basically, one is the role of the state in blockchain governance and crypto law. So, by the state, we mean kind of like the nation state, like this kind of state that we're familiar with in international law, the state that kind of dominates a lot of people's legal and political matrices today. And the question is like, okay, what is the role of the state or end of state law in crypto law and blockchain governance? So it's kind of like the super high level question. I'll give like a little more introduction to that in a second. And then the other topic is this notion of blockchain immutability, which is basically a really important blockchain governance and crypto law institution that kind of dominates blockchain governance today. The reason why they're paired together in some ways because the blockchain immutability norm in some way goes to show that the role of the state in blockchain governance and crypto law today anyways is in some way minimized or in some way minimal, at least when it comes to changes to protocol definitions. So let's take a step back and introduce the topics a little bit more in a little bit more detail. So blockchain governance is fundamentally about the decisions that we make about blockchains and the blockchain, which includes things like protocol definitions, the way we name them, the way we use them, the way that we kind of like deploy them, operate them, maintain them. Basically, blockchain governance is all about kind of the decisions that we make about the blockchain, and kind of the thing you have to realize. So, blockchain isn't immutable in the like strict sense. It runs on people's computers. They own those computers. They can turn them on and off. They can decide what software to run them. The software, the blockchain that the blockchain is implemented in is kind of stored in repositories with access permissions and that are regularly maintained. And so blockchain immutability ends up being this kind of norm as opposed to kind of tech reality that says that, we shouldn't make changes to the blockchain unless it's kind of necessary for tech maintenance. We shouldn't make any kind of like socially motivated changes, legally motivated changes, politically motivated changes. Only kind of tech maintenance is kind of allowed under the blockchain immutability regime. And then there's this other kind of question of crypto law, and as opposed to blockchain governance, which is kind of about decisions, crypto law is kind of super related, but it's about conflict and disputes and kind of how, and it kind of modulates structures, mediates, constrains, operates on the way that conflict plays out in crypto, which includes conflict over blockchain governance decisions, over how people use the blockchain, how they name it, all the software, the maintenance operation, etc. But it's not just the culture that regulates these disputes, but also we think about the nature of disputes, or the kind of disputes that come out of the definition of the system. So like there's like the dispute surface in some way as a function of the systems that we're arguing about, and they're basically like different components and stuff. And so the crypto law is also it's not just about like the culture that we have that modifies these conflicts, but also about like the systems that we create that kind of set the stage for what conflicts we can possibly have. And so there's like crypto law kind of associated with like blockchain architecture that is kind of like separate from the kind of law that will kind of govern the way that we fight over like the names of a protocol or the implementation of a protocol. And so crypto law is kind of this relatively broad set of phenomena that regulate, structure, constrain how we have disputes and conflict in blockchain governance and crypto protocols more broadly. And so the question is then, so there's two topics. One of them is, what is the role of the state in blockchain governance crypto law? And the other is kind of, immutability. Why do we have it? Where did it come from? What is it good for? Do we want it? How should we go from here? What's the like legal and governance kind of perspective on blockchain immutability? I think maybe I'll talk for just a couple more minutes before opening it up about the role of the state in blockchain governance, and to note basically that the state is normally associated in international law with a jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction is understood normally to be a kind of geographic territorial thing, whereas blockchains are they're normally understood to be like in cyberspace or in many jurisdictions, and they're kind of a consensus protocol. So if one component in one jurisdiction kind of is faulty or controlled or shut down, and it doesn't affect the integrity of the system overall. And so just because of the kind of national versus international versus cyberspace kind of let's call it legal boundaries, it isn't immediately clear what competency, authority, enforcement power state acting alone has in blockchain governance or crypto law. Basically because the blockchain doesn't exist inside the jurisdiction exactly, and it's not clear how, from an enforcement perspective, they can change the blockchain protocol definition. That said, regulating how people inside their jurisdiction use the blockchain is another matter, and there's lots of like points, like kind of these connection points where people like use the blockchain, but when we're talking about blockchain governance and crypto law, we're not only talking about how people use it, but also kind of the arguments over like the thing itself and like how is it going to be defined. And so in terms of the role of the state in blockchain governance and crypto law, basically like there are questions about about basically like jurisdiction in cyberspace, and even more than there are normally in cyberspace, where it's just like cyberspace on a server. But in this case, it's like cyberspace across many servers in many different jurisdictions. And so there's a natural kind of like question about competence of the state in regulating blockchain governance and crypto law. And then turning over to the immutability question, there's also this basically explicit prohibition on state intervention in blockchain protocol definitions. Basically, because like the immutability norm says that like, oh, any interventions for political and legal reasons, they're not just tech reasons, are prohibited. And so the immutability norm kind of additionally prohibits states from taking a role in blockchain governance and crypto law, at least in as far as it pertains to protocol definitions. And most people, for most people, including for Nick Zaba, who kind of came up with this whole immutability institution, the idea is that all the law enforcement that the state could be interested in can be done without changes to the protocol. And therefore, like, the state shouldn't be interested in this particular aspect of crypto law, basically. They kind of don't need to change the protocol for all their enforcement needs, or all the legal needs. And so somehow the idea is that the state doesn't need to be involved in blockchain governance or crypto law to get whatever it needs. And that's kind of one of the many stories associated with the immutability norm, which kind of prohibits states from changing the blockchain protocol. But, you know, in order to not be so offensive, people say, like, oh, this is not actually going to cause legal problems because, you know, people are using these protocols, and you regulate the people, not the protocol itself, and that's supposed to be enough. And so basically, we have these kinds of two related questions. One of them is, you know, what is the role? What should be the role? What can be the role of the state in blockchain governance and crypto law? And like, what does that look like in various cases? And blockchain immutability, which today dominates crypto law and blockchain governance, and which kind of restricts the role of the state in blockchain governance, but also, you know, restricts the role of the law in general in crypto law and blockchain governance. So I hope that is an okay introduction. I feel like I've been going for 10 minutes here. So I want to open it up to you guys and see if anyone has any, you know, any thoughts. Normally we would do breakout rooms, but since there's not many of us, maybe we can just chat here.
Totally open for that. Thanks for the introduction. I do have many questions, and I hope that all the rest of the people are having many questions as well. Do we want to go with the questions, like just, you know, shoot one or two that you have on your mind, or maybe type them down in the chat?
Question sounds great.
John, Andrea, Morshed.
I have a question. Can I start?
Yeah, please do.
With regards to immutability, Vlad, I think that it was very interesting what you said at the very beginning when you introduced immutability and how it operates. And the way I understood you is that you say that immutability is this norm, is this idea, the ideal that should be there, but it's not a technical reality. And then I think the way you said it, or you put it, is that there's a certain agreement that for technical upgrades, immutability is not the thing, but when it comes to social or political questions, one should stay away from changing the blockchain. So I would just be curious to hear a little more about how is this distinction made? So I'm sure people fight about then what is a technical decision, block size, I don't know. I mean, there were all these things. So yeah. I would just be curious to hear your take, because it seems to depend on whether you can sell something as a technical issue, and then you can maybe have that thing. But if you can't successfully sell it as a technical issue, then you will get in trouble with the whole ideology. So, yeah. So how does that play out?
So basically, the way that plays out is you like make the place where these people make cases for changes are basically open source software governance kind of forums, like either like email lists or issues in GitHub comments. And so you kind of will go to one of these venues and try to make a case. And if you don't make the case in like the relevant, you know, like in a way that's like suitable to the relevant judgment that they're used to applying, then it's going to be kind of hard to go through. So if it's not like the very normal changes, then it's going to raise a bunch of extra kind of defenses, including kind of like, you know, higher standards required for the technical specification of the proposed upgrade, and discussion about the merits and why this is the thing. And the thing also to note is that the way that this happens in Bitcoin and Ethereum is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of speaking in a way that like is true of both. But if we can be a little more specific, the Bitcoiners they have like a very well developed kind of dogma or system or for, and not everyone agrees on exactly the details, but they have a system where like enough of the Bitcoin wizards agree on enough of the details for determining kind of what is a small enough tech upgrade to be allowed. So not only do they like kind of not only allow tech upgrades, they only really allow the smallest ones. They kind of have like this notion that even the tech should be immutable and we shouldn't change it under any circumstance. Whereas in Ethereum, we're much more flexible about tech upgrades. We have like a less restrictive prohibition on upgrades, but we still have a similar kind of thing where if you're asking for an upgrade that kind of changes significantly like the political or legal arrangements around protocol definitions, they basically are just you're basically just going to be blocked, basically because the developers feel very, very afraid of making legal judgments, of having to take this position as like an arbiter, or of having to take basically more responsibility and liability. And so they will basically say like if something can't be done just with tech judgment, they'll be like, they start to freak out and like like quit, step down, like like really they can be very concerned if you ask them to make a change that isn't kind of within their tech open source software practice. So basically they have an established process for tech upgrades. So it's slightly different in different communities. And if you don't put your proposal through the tech upgrade process in a way that like doesn't make them alarmed that you're changing the system, too much, then you can't. It's really hard to get anything through. You basically it basically needs to be like crisis or extraordinary circumstance, at least given the kind of immutability regime that we have today.
Very cool. Can I just a mini follow-up? That was super helpful. A mini follow-up is, how much does it matter who is the person who suggests something? So I really don't know anything about how the inner life of the Ethereum community works, but is it such a closely net thing that basically everyone knows everyone and you know exactly who that is? Or does it happen that you have proposals by people that literally you don't know who they are, and they are just evaluated on what is proposed, or is it a mix?
Yeah, it's kind of both. So it happens that people who no one knows who they are make really high quality proposals, and then other people like it. But it also happens that like someone who people don't know who they are makes a high quality proposal. Someone like looks into them, finds that they worked with Bitcoin Satoshi's vision, and then like does like a political campaign to discredit them. And it has also been kind of ugly, where people are kind of like excluded for their associations, because they're seen as being like kind of politically motivated instead of being impartial. And so there's definitely also this game that has happened that we've seen before of disqualifying people based on who's and disqualifying proposals based on who's making them, which I am not super proud of. In Ethereum, the way that went was super not pretty with specifically the ProgPow proposal. But what I would say is often people don't know who made a proposal, but they know who is championing it. Kind of like if, like Vitalik will seldom make proposals, but he'll get behind EAPs, and so will lots of people in the space. They'll be like, hey, I think EAP 1559 is super important. That's one of the ones that's getting a lot of hype right now. And people will kind of champion it even if they aren't the ones who have proposed it. And then there's this process by which the proposals get taken up by the developers in their kind of it depends on the type of proposal, but some proposals are like core protocol changes, and they have to be implemented by all of the core protocol developers. And so there's a process by which, like, there's a process by which EAPs get picked up by the core developers, and that is like kind of separate and not always super tightly related to the question of like the political popularity of the EAP. It's much more questions of like, do the developers want to implement it? Is it something they consider to be an improvement? Is it something that they think is, easy to, has it already been implemented? Like one of the main things is like if someone goes and implements it in like all the clients and then makes a proposal, it's much easier for them to accept it than if they're asking the developers to implement it. And that also can have an impact. And it's interesting because there's been like kind of a governance concern basically when like the developers like have software that's basically ready that they want to release that the community doesn't want to adopt, and so like we have to and it's like annoying for them because we have this ready product, they want to release it and the community doesn't want it, but they also want to release it just so people can use it on test nets and for other stuff, and then it ends up causing like this kind of governance friction where people just like misunderstand or freaking out, all sorts of kind of stuff.
Is there an example that you could like just flesh that out, where like what sort of fight emerges in those sort of like levels, like in a concrete sort of sense?
Yeah, so the ProgPow one is the one I was thinking about now, where it was implemented. It was like super derided in the community, but like the tech effort was great. It was, the core developers like it. They looked at all the tech and other people implemented it, and like it was just like all the technical standards were met. But the community was like, no, because like the woman who created this thing like had some affiliations in the past with people who most people in crypto consider to be unsavory, and there's other reasons too. Like for example, people were upset at the idea that we're upgrading the proof of work algorithm while we should be moving to proof of stake, and so there were like these expectation mismatches. And so we had this big kind of governance, like ongoing governance kerfuffle over ProgPow. Is one of the examples that I'm thinking about in a lot of this conversation.
Sorry, and what sort of things would make you like unsavory, and how do you get attached? Like, so how would you, like, what does that?
So you've heard perhaps of Bitcoin Satoshi's vision and of this guy, Craig Wright, who claims to be Satoshi.
Yeah.
And so there's this big, so when you claim that you're Satoshi, it's kind of heresy in the Bitcoin community. And everyone that's like a Bitcoiner, like, like a true by the book Bitcoin core, like heterodox Bitcoiner, you kind of will regard this project and anything to do with it as basically being heretical. And so this woman, Christie, who built this amazing software, did some work on contracts for these people who the Bitcoiners basically have this religious war against. And so like, and this anti-Craig Wright thing, this anti-social vision thing is, strong also in Ethereum, because like, people basically think he's a fraud and think it's like super not cool what he's doing, claiming to be Satoshi, etc. And so they kind of see her as supporting him, basically because she worked on a contract for their company at some point. Basically just mining hardware stuff, like mining software stuff, like relatively normal kind of work. But because of the association, because of the heresy, because of the kind of orthodoxy, she got super duper badly treated, which I thought was like terrible.
And what would be the thanks for sharing, and with that, like, so what does that mean socioeconomically in the power? So like so she puts together the software proposal. What would have been the stakes?
Problems.
What would have been the stakes if it had gone forward for her? Does that?
So basically, she would have had gotten to. So she's like obsessed with hardware and mining and stuff, and for her it's like kind of an interesting project. She wanted to fix the hash function, and she wanted to like improve it, and she didn't really like the stakes for her aren't really what people assume. Basically she's a miner. She believes in graphics card mining, and it would have protected the graphics card mining industry for Ethereum. It's like ASIC resistance. There's this whole ASIC mining versus graphics card mining discussion. And so her software would have prolonged the lifetime of graphics card mining on Ethereum. And so, you know, as a graphics card miner, that's kind of like great for her, but she's like a all around hardware expert. So it's not like she can't compete in the ASIC scene, but you know, she believes in the GPU mining and the GPU mining scene. And so basically, she tried to fix this bug, and then like there was like a few people in the Ethereum community who like just had it out to get her and kind of like made it really difficult. And I think there's like a number of things that like conspired to make it difficult, but but at the end of the day, ironically, like, you know, no one's happy. Basically, like it's just been like a real governance shit show, to be honest.
Hey, can I maybe just make a mini intervention to ask if maybe Michaela and Stephen would like to introduce themselves, and then we can pick up again.
Yeah, please.
I think they have some questions as well in the chat.
Oh, cool.
Stephen, if you want to turn on your microphone.
Oh, he says he can't.
He can't because he's in the office and so chat only. That's okay, Stephen. Okay,
Yeah,
so maybe while
yeah.
you chat, Michaela, do you think your connection is good enough to let us hear who you are and what you do?
Hello? Yes, it's okay. Sorry. I'm in my home office now. I'm researching just as a freelancer, going to take a PhD soon. I'm an economist and graduate in law, and a Master of Law in International Arbitration. And my research is focused on benchmarking, but not in what IT people thinks about benchmarking, but economists' view on benchmarking. Now I'm trying to apply the methodology on law, and I'm interested also in tech law, because I represented as a global ambassador for Romania, Women Tech Network, in their global conference on 2020, now in June. So glad to hear you about speaking about blockchain. Thank you.
Super cool. Thank you.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
share. Guys, do you have any more questions? Because I do have one question. Like, is there any list, for example, for all these? Well, Michaela just used the word benchmark. It's kind of a good word also for blockchain governance. But when people were making the decisions, or just like Andrea previously noted, is there like a list that would indicate all the elements that need to be considered when we are making a decision whether something is of a technical issue, or is it merely a political, or is this just, you know, a free flow?
No, I mean, I would say that there are norms and there's practices and experiences and expectations, but one of those is one of the norms, expectations that's missing is that people write down kind of why they made decisions the way they did. You know, there's a lot of norms around like record keeping of decision making that basically don't exist, or that like are kind of like, there's no like, you know, there's no like official like here's what happened at the end. You know, there's kind of like just like messages and comments, and like you could kind of try to piece it together if you just do the investigation work. But definitely in terms of like, you know, like a place where we can look at all the decisions and why they're made, and like this kind of like you know, somewhat normal legal information registry that you might expect totally doesn't exist. And I'm not even sure if it's that normal to expect, but you know, definitely I would say no. It's, you basically have to do like first what is it called, like primary resources. You have to like go through, dig through primary resources.
I have a related question, which is about, you know, the degree of influence and like the intensity of influence that let's call them like a third party could have on those who are involved in, let's say, a technical decision, whether it's a, however we end up defining what a technical decision is. The reason I ask this, and like, is there a way of thinking about how there can be different degrees of influence? Because, so like, I just wanted to explain in the sense that, in one area of organizational law, in company law, for instance, you have this distinction between obviously like a board of directors, but you also have like shadow directors of a company. And this concept exists because of the fact that company law acknowledges that there will be people who regularly give directions and in a way act as a strong influence on the board, and the board is accustomed to taking these directions and acting accordingly. And the issue is of course is that this is defined usually quite vaguely, deliberately, because there can be many different ways you can exercise influence. It doesn't necessarily have to be through a token. So I'm curious as whether I'm sure that this has been an issue that's been discussed, but like how this is framed when we talk about Ethereum's governance.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, people have, all sorts of concerns actually about like informal power structures and like whether there are people that's like that form like a shadow government that like really decide what's happening in Ethereum. And there's a lot of genuine concern about, this question of who's really hurting all these cats, like what's really happening, like who's really deciding stuff. Because if you look at the ground and you talk to everyone, basically no one seems to really be in this kind of director position almost at all. And so basically the thing to do is just to understand kind of like separation of responsibilities in blockchain governance today. Is the first thing. And then the second thing to understand is kind of like the level of dysfunction that we experience. And once you look at the dysfunction, I think it starts to become a little more clear that there isn't actually, a shadow government of Ethereum or something like that. Basically because even if there was, it's obviously too dysfunctional to really be considered a competent government. And so I guess let's like zoom in on like some particular decisions on, like, for example, maybe that a core developer might make, and ask about, their kind of agency in that context. Does that sound okay, or do you have like a particular kind of actor in blockchain governance in mind?
No. I think that's a good way of setting this discussion up.
So let's say, for example, like the core developers on the all devs call, which is kind of like in some way like the most important or most like the most formally powerful institution in Ethereum governance, really, is this like call facilitated by the Ethereum Foundation, where different core developers from different clients get together and agree on like the short-term release roadmap. And basically they are kind of, they have this call, maybe like 30, 40 people are going to be there, highly formal, moderated call, where they try to go through like an agenda of like the things that might be ready for discussion about whether or not they should go into the roadmap. And, if you wanted to kind of direct that process, I mean, the person who has the most agency, I suppose, is the facilitator of the call, who kind of has the most say in setting the agenda. But for example, taking a look at the ProgPow thing, like ProgPow came up a number of times, and then pretty much after a time when it came up, like there was like so much community outrage over the fact that the developers were talking about it on like all devs call, that basically like the developers had to kind of like clarify the process, like make sure that people understand that, like, just because they include some software doesn't mean that they need to adopt it. Like, they decided ultimately not to even include it because it was contentious and people would kind of they didn't want to risk the kind of loss of legitimacy or the law, associated with shipping software that people don't adopt. And so, so there's like this major force in the all devs call of, which will kind of only it's felt sometimes of will people adopt this software? Like, is this software something that people want? But there are many cases that are not controversial. And in those cases, it could be more conceivable that the all devs call, people on the all devs call exercise a bunch of agency. But if there needs to be kind of consensus between the different client developers, at least on the two major implementations, for any consensus critical bug. And they basically need to, basically because if they don't implement that in the same way, then they can fall out of consensus when the upgrade is installed, which is kind of considered to be like a systemic problem. If you think about the like agency of core developers, that it actually happens kind of less in the all core devs call, which is kind of like formally like the powerful institution, and more in kind of this long-term planning, long-term code changes that aren't consensus critical. Because as soon as something is consensus critical, you kind of have to coordinate with other people, and you basically have less agency, because like everyone has to agree, it has to go through this whole process, or else basically there's this big risk of consensus failure, of people shipping software that isn't used.
Just a second, is there like when you say consensus critical, how do you actually define that?
Basically, if basically imagine you don't install the software upgrade, then you lose consensus with people who do. So like imagine like you change the block validity rules, and then all of a sudden there's a block that like I consider invalid and you consider valid, and then like you go on this chain and I go on a different one, and like we don't really have the same network anymore. It's kind of like
forking.
It's forking, but it's forking it's more like a split than a fork. Because like fork also refers to this situation where there isn't a split, where everyone moves.
But is that okay? And that's
it's
not the only. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm waiting for you.
I'm assuming that that's not the only issue where it would be critical for the consensus to exist as it was before. There's many more, like different situations where.
No. I mean, whatever situation is a use consensus, basically the effect is that like you can end up on different blockchains.
Okay.
By virtue of the fact that like, you don't agree on like the way the protocol is, like what the consensus state is of the protocol, basically. So I guess what I'm kind of describing here is that like developers have less agency than most people would kind of assume, and they're kind of in almost all circumstances when it comes to consensus critical stuff, highly constrained in both the political acceptability of solutions and also in terms of like how they have to work together in order to make sure that they all implement compatible changes. And so core developers have relatively little agency, and so if you try to influence them, it doesn't end up buying you a lot. And actually, because of the kind of blockchain immutability norm, the developers that had a ton of agency actually were kind of like pre-launch, like pre-Ethereum launch. Like that's where like a ton of agency was exercised. But kind of like after the protocol is like set in stone in the immutability context, it's like relatively challenging because of this norm to make big decisions. So I don't know if this goes towards answering your question really.
Sure.
More,
I think it gets more complicated with this when we consider that when you have a fork, depending on the hard and the soft fork, uh, like which fork has the highest hash power. That depends on if it's a hard fork or soft fork or the economic strength, like who has the more.
but almost
And then,
almost always the developers want to avoid this kind of.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So
So I'm
they
just saying
just want to
that
make
then there are other
non-competitive,
stakeholders
not even
also at
competitive.
play.
Yeah, totally. But the developers like basically are desperate to not have that situation. Like for them, the
Yeah,
peaceful
because
situation
the
is like
uncertainty.
everyone accepts all the software they write.
No, because I was thinking of the DAO hard fork.
Yeah.
Because when the DAO hard fork happened, I don't know, maybe I don't know if everybody's aware of this, and it's called a DAO hard fork.
Assume not. Give us a little.
Okay, so I would say DAO hard fork happened 2016, I think, right? The 20, yeah, 2016. So where basically there was a contract which kind of crowdsourcing, and so somebody executed the contract in a way that they were able to take out a lot more money than they could have. There was an argument after
They
that
stole
that
money basically from the DAO.
sorry.
Someone hacked it and stole money from it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they drained out the money. So then there was the whole thing that what should we do about it? So that resulted in a fork. So one fork, which is the Ethereum now, it's basically fixed that problem. The other fork did not, which is the classic. So there was a lot of contention around this because of immutability, because even the fact that is it a hack or is it not a hack, there was all those conversations happening even.
Whether it's theft at all or not.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Because some argued technically it's actually okay what they did. It's not theft. It's a feature, not a bug. All those.
But I do want to push back against the supposition that that was like a legitimate argument.
Yeah, I'm just saying
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I'm just saying what was the situation, and then that resulted in the fork. And initially, it seemed that the classic had more hash power, but over the time, so there was a lot of things that happened where it was clear that it is not just the core developers or the Ethereum Foundation controlling everything. It's more the community. It's not that how do I put it? Let's say organized in a kind of a way that you can just
It's
say,
like less. It's not as command and control as like a typical.
yeah, yeah, exactly. As many would even like to think, maybe, just on a superficial way, but it's
Very
not.
much so.
So, yeah, yeah.
And so in the DAO hard fork, what kind of happened was everyone. So there was this huge crisis, and no one wanted to make the decision. Like the developers didn't want to make the decision. No one had the authority to make the decision. No one wants the liability associated with that kind of decision. And so the developers let like a flag so that like the people who install the software could decide which fork to use. There was like coin voting whereby like Gavin tried to make it so that he's not deciding what the default is. There was
There were
basically
the carbon votes. There was the carbon votes
the
thing.
carbon vote also. Yeah, that's right, which was a coin voting.
Yeah, that's the overnight thing. I think only 6% voted or something. Well, the coins,
Yeah,
maybe not even.
6% of the coins is a lot, but definitely
That's true. That's
the
true. But
problem more
definitely, yeah.
with the carbon vote is that it was like very short notice, like a week before the DAO hard fork or something that happened. And but people did a lot of work to try to coordinate and figure out where everyone was going without kind of being the one who is like making the decision for everyone, because no one is supposed to have and no one does actually have that authority, or that like legitimacy, authority, like force, command, position. Which is not to say that there wasn't lots of agency at different points, but the way that these things work is kind of like, like I exercise some agency in order to get people to like prioritize like creating a spec, and then we argued over the spec like crazy, and then and then like it was eventually implemented and audited, and, but like the process of adopting it in some way was is like more enacting than like the proposal. Even though when you make a proposal, you certainly execute, you certainly have a lot of agency.
Yeah, because also there is this kind of I don't know, this kind of almost principle in these things of non-custodialship, which kind of gets in the way, or colors all this decision making, where people are like, I don't want to make as a core developer or whoever, I don't want to make a decision on your behalf because it's your coin, you decide. So ultimately, at the same time, if it's your coin, you don't have enough of a clout to make your choice available, or you don't know even where to appeal for necessarily. So, because these things are not clearly, like, it's not like there is a kind of agora where you can appeal or anything like that.
So here's a question. Uh, let's suppose, taking back to our other topic, that like the state, let's say like the U.S. government or like the EU or the Chinese Communist Party decided that like they want the DAO hard fork to not happen, or they want the DAO hard fork to happen. Um, you know, like during the crisis, where they have like more of an opportunity to influence the outcomes than during like normal blockchain governance situation where immutability norms aren't being violated, or there's no exceptional circumstance that warrants this kind of intervention. So like assuming we have this kind of emergency situation where people are considering an emergency software upgrade and trying to coordinate on on this kind of software, like which of the software to install, like this one or that one. How would a nation state exert itself in order to have influence in crypto law and blockchain governance at this kind of critical juncture? What is the model by which a state legitimately, lawfully could intervene in such a setting? Any ideas?
I think there could be, I don't see any formal way of doing it, because the way usually could happen is either they would have to like develop a cloud, so they would have to be on Twitter, Reddit, and all these things, troll people really hard, talk about stuff, try to influence the direction of the community. But it's not like,
couldn't they just be like, if you are a U.S. person and you advocate for that hard fork, we're fine. Although I don't think that would be lawful. I don't think that would be lawful.
That would not be.
It shouldn't be that hard.
And I would think that this operates at almost at two levels, right? Like there is the part about where you have a hard fork and you are basically creating a new, let's say, infrastructure, and another one just at the level of the DAO itself. Mm-hmm. And the question of whether, what happened with the DAO is criminal or not. And so there's a level.
The DAO hack, you mean?
Yes. So then, like with your question, whether it's the state trying to intervene to say we want to sanction criminal behavior, or is it at the level of the state trying to intervene to say no, we have a vested interest that there isn't a fork, and that's at a more fundamental level.
Yeah, so in this case, I wasn't making an assumption, but let's do both cases. Let's say in one case the state wants to deal with this the crime and provide remedies to the kind of victims, and another, let's assume the state doesn't want to have non-state blockchain governance, or like they just want power in blockchain governance, so they prefer, or maybe in this case they would prefer that blockchain is immutable, so that blockchain governance isn't part of the calculus about enforcement in crypto.
So are there two states that we are actually mentioning when it comes to the relation between the blockchain infrastructure and the state? One is that if there is something being done unlawfully by the DAO, then the state kind of has to intervene because it goes against the citizens' interest. And then there's another aspect of it, and that is that the states, not that they want to interfere, but they just want to capture the infrastructure because, again, they see that there is a lot of benefit for the citizens.
Yeah,
I
potentially.
mean, unless most of the people who hold the coins live in a single state, which state wants to do something about it, even if they do, like the situation which Vlad mentioned, that they say it will just be fined. Even if they try to do that, I mean, it would affect the people of that country. Worst case might lead to a fork. People who don't want to do it, do not accept the flag, for example, don't want to get fined. But it would not, considering that most people who have crypto are not in any single state, like it's more or less like distributed throughout the world. It has to need like a matter of like multiple states coming together in a kind of international court to decide and try to have a kind of a thing of the people, which is
Yeah.
which is itself massive. Yeah, I don't see even they would not even know who to talk to in that case. You know what I mean, to make that happen. So.
But hypothetically, if you had a coalition of states who
Mhm.
decided, like, anyone who accepts the DAO hard fork, anyone who rejects it is committing a criminal act as far as our legal systems are concerned. And then I think that could have some force in determining some people's choice. However, the thing that it also does is it creates a really low hanging fruit civil disobedience opportunity, where like
Mm.
basically you can do some really powerful civil disobedience by just running software, which most people feel relatively comfortable, at least if you have like a computer in your home and some basic infosec kind of understanding. Um, that's not most people, but definitely enough people would be able to, in protest, run this other fork. But that's kind of like assuming that the government's decision is not legitimate. If it is legitimate, then that really just isn't such a good opportunity.
But I mean, I think now also we're living in a times where globally there's a lot of unrest and a lot of resistance everywhere. It would not be like, I mean, that also factors in, like, if you're already in a kind of a
Mm-hmm.
atmosphere, kind of a culture where people are kind of revolting, that might also like influence like people on online like to do the same
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah, totally.
So
In some ways, the exceptional legal circumstances, characterize crypto law.
what do
Yeah,
you mean
crypto law is born from the state of exception, from the Schmittian
yeah,
state of
from
exception.
Bitcoin itself? Even literally Bitcoin
Yeah,
was
although I wouldn't necessarily call it the Schmittian state of exception, because
Yeah,
like Schmidt has this like crazy theory of exception that I find to be like just so out there that it's like basically lawless. I mean, like his idea of like a sovereign that isn't subject to the rule of law is just like appalling for me. But totally, it's a state of exception thing. If you think about, for example, like why would like the CFTC chairman come and say like how amazing Ethereum is,
yeah, and
if
compared with
if
Bitcoin
we have
even.
like a normal, we had like a normal kind of legal setting, like this kind of like blockchain crypto law, like prohibition on state action uh, wouldn't be considered like this like amazing opportunity for a trust machine. It would be considered like unlawful, basically, because it's like an affront to state power. But instead, it's considered to be like a huge legal opportunity, because like this because everyone in international law like kind of feels the limitation of state law in in creating this kind of infrastructure.
And also, there's another aspect, which is the channels of communication that the state uses has changed. So you would not think they would give a video; they would give like a formal notice saying, this is sanctioned, this is not. But it's just like a video where this guy says, and which is the case. Why? Because even when you see, say, the case of the POTUS, the US, I mean, Twitter has become a kind of official channel for many of the things that they want to do, which was not the case. So that's why it's already kind of becoming, it's like the zeitgeist, I would say, not just in crypto, in general. And that, works really well for crypto, that to use kind of informal, in air quotes, channels of communication to actually try to enact things that would otherwise have been more
Yeah.
formal.
And I think that one of the things that kind of makes this super challenging is basically now, if we have this like non-state law setting for crypto law, we need to kind of like have legal imaginations that don't just use state enforced rules in order to, you know, understand how crypto law works, or in order to do crypto law, or to practice, kind of like curating, gardening, tending to crypto law.
So Vlad, I had sort of like three thoughts to what you were saying. One is, it's one way I sometimes think about when people talk about Schmidt and the state of exception and all that, is to just think that one way of saying it is any regime, any sort of collective process underlying some sort of creation, like money creation, ultimately entails a logic that doesn't have any justification other than sort of like, well, that's the way it is. So I'll just put that out there. So for example, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Why do we have those letters or those things? At some level, it's there and it gets enforced. And the same is true like between competing rights that both seem really legitimate. We sort of like come up with governance decisions which aren't immutable and natural and tied to some existing order. They're ultimately like a decision. So sometimes I think like it's just sometimes I think it's just it could be useful to try to get to the decision. And on that,
I don't agree. I don't disagree at all. I mean, for me, like the notion of using agency to make decisions, and even like sovereignty in an exception, seems totally okay, but and actually then much more the norm than people like to admit. But the thing that I really find objectionable about like Carl Schmitt's crazy theory is that he thinks that like only one person per state can be sovereign, and it's just such garbage. I mean, if you think about like legal agency, if you think about exception, about norms, rules,
so let's say
the kind of cracks where you don't have systems or rules and you need to use judgment. I mean, it's everywhere. It's not like just the sovereign understood as just this one guy in these just exceptional circumstances. I mean, it's just all the time pervasive that people use agency in exception, not associated with like this kind of crazy position of power that like shouldn't exist.
I'm with you. So then, like, once we get to the issue is like, well, what it is it's not like there's this single agent, right? Sometimes then, if that's the case, so the second point is that sometimes when we talk about the state and the government, we start thinking of it, we almost reimpose that idea of it being like the single thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so we have this like good critique of, once we realize what we have a problem with Schmidt, suddenly we see ourselves sometimes reproducing that in the way we talk about the state. And when I think about the state and money, I could imagine like if I pulled back that black box of the state, those collective processes, it seems to me that stakeholding, which we're talking about, is complex. I wrote it down. It entails like anchoring demand for a medium by collecting regular contributions and enforcing its use within a payment community. And to do that to date, the only successful monetary engineers have traditionally been states or governments, right? And now whether those states...
Although, wouldn't you say that like the engineers just use the state as like, to like rubber stamp? There's kind of like this notion of like the state as like a person who legitimizes and gets behind all sorts of legal actions of all sorts of different people.
I'm with you, brother. So like, I think then if we're thinking of the state as like a certain configuration, like an institutional configuration that like does certain things, right? Has certain processes. it seems to me that it's oftentimes when we say, oh, it's the state versus this like deregulated space or something like that, it's not maybe the most useful ways we could frame the like where the fights are or how it's happening.
I mean, I agree with you if, for example, we're fighting for and within this for state recognition or in state law or for state certification or for state authority, then I agree. But I think from like a legal perspective, there is this notion of like state enforced law, and there's this notion of and I think the notion of state enforcement, you know, whether or not you like, you know, pull back the veil on the state, is this very particular legal form and legal mode that we're talking about, where basically we have like this notion of like an imaginary legal person that enforces rules, and it's not imaginary. I just use that word just to kind of riff with your idea that we shouldn't consider them to be so singleton. But
And
even
the
if it's
state-
not singleton, it's still the state enforcement model is very much, you know, a common legal model.
We could go further in terms of, I'm with you, like in terms of the enforcement, it's not just that it enforces, it serves as the backdrop to kick stuff off. So if you wanted to think about how the state might attack a blockchain community, for example, we could think of all sorts of ways that they could do it just by monetary policy, right? Or playing with the sort of financial franchise with retail banks.
But it's really, it's and it kind of has been done to some extent, but it's really hard to imagine actually from the point of view of legitimacy. Like, can it do it legitimately? And what changes are required for that to be legitimate?
Imagine
today, it seems to be would require a crisis or some kind of change in the political environment.
Morshed, I hate to interrupt you, but we will be we will have to close this session in 3 minutes. So maybe just be quick, be short, and then John, you can introduce us to what you and Andrea are going to be talking tomorrow, just to give us an idea and maybe some homework if there is any, and to prepare us best for the tomorrow session. Go ahead, Morshed.
No, I will let John have the time to introduce the session. It's okay.
well, maybe, Morshed, I actually want to know what you were going to say as well. And Vlad, just interested to sort of like pressure.
Oh, I was just going to mention that you were just talking about using monetary policy, and back at home in Bangladesh, we've had a ban on the purchase of cryptocurrency for several years now. And one of the ways they enforce this is by restricting what you can do with a credit card, for instance. So that's you have like a limit on what the uses of a credit card. So you wouldn't be able to use it for that sort of a foreign exchange transaction, which has been quite effective in preventing, or at least making it very difficult for those who don't have relatives abroad who can buy it for them to actually do this. That's all I wanted to say for now.
Yeah, that's very cool. We could think of so many different ways that maybe it'd be fun to think about how like state sort of like the processes could attack it.
But the legitimacy question is super relevant because, you know, the state doesn't get a cost-free way to enforce all sorts of illegitimate stuff. Like, it has a real cost associated with illegitimate actions.
Yeah,
so
for
before
sure.
we can go through with enforcement, it has to criminalize it, or at least regulate it.
Well, we could talk about that tomorrow. Like, there's lots. Like, that'd be fun to actually like just say like let's brainstorm all the creative ways that people could be naughty. That would be interesting. That's interesting.
No, but also, like, you know, the ways in which crypto becomes delegitimized to the point where these bans become legitimate.
Yeah, for sure. We can. So tomorrow, actually, there's an opportunity to do this. The basic format is that Andrea and I will say hi, and we want to make a proposition like a game, which is we want to give you two formulas. One of them is 4 sentences, and one of them is 1 sentence. The 4 sentences, so the 1 sentence goes like this. You might have thought blank, but I want to tell you actually blank. So for example, you might have thought that this was all about decentralization. I want to actually argue to you that this is just standardization, or you know, whatever. Another way, and you could talk, and then maybe if people want, you could expand on that. Another game is this 4 sentences, and the 4 sentences go, there's a tendency of this group of people to do this. You'd have to tell us what that is. The problem with what they're doing is this. There's a blind spot, there's a cost. So what I propose instead is to do this, and I think the payoff is this. So, you know, for example, in development, we oftentimes try to develop techniques for growth. The problem is that we live on a finite planet. So what I'll do instead is bring in degrowth theories of development. And I hope that this pays off, that it opens up new policy space for, you know, international economic governance, right? So in that framework, we'll we can come up with lots of different ones of thinking about crypto and all these different themes that we've been talking about. And what we thought we'd do is we'd put people into rooms and have them sort of like hash out ideas together of how they feel, what, you know, what resonates with them. And then we'll come back and people could share stuff of where their conversations went, and that could direct the conversation. Is that something? That's basically the idea.
Sounds really cool.
And would love to have these same ideas. Like there's so much here, just would love to get into and listen to.
Yeah, and we're just scratching the surface. We're just scratching the surface.
True.
Straight up.
All right, thank you so much. We have to get off the call, but looking forward to meet you again tomorrow, 9:15 Central European time. So let's kick it off.
Thank you, everybody. Just one thing, Anya, before we go, is there any way that all the participants can keep chatting or something? Like, is there?
There's a new room here that was posted in the chat.
Okay. I didn't see the chat. Okay. I will look in the chat. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, Alisa, is this room going to remain open, or is it? Does it have any more sessions happening in it?
We don't have sessions happening in it right now, but we can't technically leave it open, sorry.
Gotcha. Okay. All good. Let's talk soon then.
Bye.
See you guys. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.